Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome back to my channel. It's good to see you again, and I hope that wherever you are in the universe, you are having a most wonderful day. My name is Shoshana Chaya, and I am a simple Jewish woman. I was hoping to do today, what I was hoping to do today was to get more into the practical aspects of living living an observant Jewish life, especially as it concerns Jewish prayer and Jewish meditation. But it occurred to me as I was starting to record this video that there are a couple of questions that I have been asked a lot that I would really like to address. And the first question is, why did I convert to Judaism? And the second question is, what is the process of converting to Judaism? Now, the first question, the why question, is a question that is asked mostly by North American Jews. And the assumption always is that because I don't look like the stereotypical North American Jew, that I am not Jewish from birth, that I must have converted to Judaism. Now, I never get asked this question in Israel. It's really quite interesting. Israelis always assume that I am Jewish. That is not even a question that ever arises. But in North America, it is a question that arises very often in my Jewish milieu. And that's understandable because most North American Jews are of Ashkenazi Jewish extraction and consequently are Caucasian. So they don't really expect a Black person to be Jewish. It's not very common. It's not unheard of in North America. It's just not very common. So I take no exception to that question, by the way. I welcome it, and it always makes for good conversation. So, but it occurred to me that since I was being asked this question off camera, as it were, that there may be many people on YouTube who have the same question. So I'm going to attempt to answer both questions as thoroughly as I can within the next 15 to 20 minutes. So about my converting to Judaism. Interestingly enough, I was actually born Jewish, although I did not know this until I was 19 years old. I had gone to visit my grandmother one day when I was 19, and I know I was 19 because it was my second year in university. That's how I can gauge that. And I had gone to visit my grandmother. And as she was getting ready for her Christian mothers meeting, she casually turns to me and says, "Oh, by the way, you do realize we're Jewish, don't you?" And no, I didn't know we were Jewish. And I really, quite frankly, didn't know what that meant. And I'm sorry, I've got something like it's itchy around my neck. And I had promised my friends who critiqued my first video that I would stop tugging up my hair and tugging up my clothes and just generally distracting people. So I'm sorry I had to do that. I'll try to be on my best behavior from now on. Anyway, so my grandmother told me this. It meant nothing to me. However, I was very aware in my early teenage years at high school that I felt an incredibly close bond with the few Jewish girls that were in my school. And in fact, two of them were my best friends. But I didn't really make anything of it until my grandmother told me that. And it was like, I see. Now I understand why I felt that way about Jewish people. And I didn't really think any more of it. The reason being that at 19, I really kind of was in the throes of an existential crisis, number one. Number two, I really had zero interest in religion. zero interest. I had got to a point in my life where I was completely not just not interested, I had totally rejected religion as it had been taught to me when I was growing up. And as a very young child, I lived in a staunch Catholic environment and I had to learn catechism. And it wasn't long before I really lost any kind of confidence or belief in the system at all. It didn't make any sense to me. And yes, I mean, I'm not going to go into my own feelings about Catholicism because I don't think that's really relevant. But in any event, when I finally, in my 20s, this is in the mid 1980s when I was living in London, embarked on a spiritual quest, I became infinitely more interested in Judaism. And at that point, it wasn't so much that I was interested in the theology of Judaism. I didn't really regard Judaism as a spiritual path, but I just became infinitely more conscious of the bond that I felt with Jewish people and always recognized myself as one of them, although we were mostly different colors. I found that all the people I worked with or I worked for were Jewish. My best friend forever was Jewish. Practically everybody in my circle was Jewish, and I always felt that these were my people. And, buttressed, of course, by the fact that my grandmother had told me that we were Jewish. And so I never really questioned my Jewish identity after that. It was just, oh, we're Jews, And I began, I remember that when I was living in London, I just became much more aware of Jewish history. I became much more aware of the Holocaust and all the things that had happened. And they affected me very deeply, very, very deeply indeed. But still, at that point, I wasn't really making a connection between Jewish people and a spiritual path called Judaism. There was no connection being made in my mind at that point because all the Jewish people I met were really secular Jews. Anyway, cut a very, very, very long story short, I did get involved in my spiritual development. And before I left London in the early 90s, my spiritual development had really taken the central focus of my life. That was really all I cared about more than anything else. At that time, I still thought that all I really wanted was to attain spiritual enlightenment or attain true wisdom. And the way I was going about it convinced me that I was very well on my way. So fast forward some more, I get to North America get to the United States actually, as part of my spiritual process at that time. I came here to be with other people who were engaged in a spiritual system that I was involved with. And we lived, my whole life was God-centered completely. And all I cared about was God. All I cared about was developing real trust in God. I was very aware that there was this distance between me and my Creator, and that I was quite terrified of him, actually, and I could never really trust him to have my best interest at heart. And So I was working very, very hard at really believing in and trusting God. That was all I was really concerned about. Anyway, as I progressed in my spiritual path, so to speak, it became very clear to me that my only way out, so to speak, was through Torah. I just had to learn Torah. And this was actually because I had more than a passing interest in Kabbalah. And I was reading books on Kabbalah, finding out everything I could about Kabbalah. I was actually going to write a book even on Kabbalistic principles and Kabbalistic symbolism. This became almost like an obsession for me. And at one point, it just became really clear. It was a knowing within me that my only way, really, that the only way that Kabbalah was going to ever make sense in my life was if I knew Torah. I had to learn Torah. I had to study Torah. I had to live Torah. That was the only way. And I wasn't quite sure what to do with this. So I spoke to a couple of rabbis, and it was like, well, what do I do? How do I get into Torah? How do I get into Judaism? What should I do? And I remember speaking to a couple of rabbis. There was one rabbi in particular that I talked to, and I said, you know, I'm Jewish. My grandmother told me many years ago that we were Jewish, and I just want to know now what to do. And he said, your grandmother's Jewish, your mother's mother? And I said, sure. And he said, your mother's Jewish? That means your mother's Jewish. That means you're Jewish. End of conversation. I said, yes, but what do I do? And he goes, well, why would you need to do anything? And so I guess I wasn't really asking the right question. But I didn't quite know what to ask. So I thought, okay, well, I'll go to Israel. I'm bound to find the answer in Israel. So I went to Israel and I loved it. I was, I burst into tears when I landed at Ben Gurion, and it felt really like a homecoming. And I would go to the Western Wall every day, and I would go to, I took off to Tzfat, actually. I remember the place I wanted to go to first was Tzfat. And I went to Tzfat for a couple of weeks, and I would go to the Arizal's tomb, and I would sit there and meditate, and I would go into his Ashkenazi synagogue. I would sit there and meditate, and I would go into his Sephardic synagogue, and I would sit there and meditate. And I wanted so desperately to go to where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was buried. So I went to Meron, and everything I had read about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and the origins of the Zohar, which is kind of the central scripture to Kabbalah, everything I had read told me that when Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was exiled by the Romans, that he spent 12 years in a cave in northern Israel. And this was where he was when the inspiration for the Zohar came in. And I wanted to go to that cave because I was very sensitive to energy. I was very sensitive to sacred energy, I guess we call it Kedusha. I was very, very sensitive to that. And I could feel vibrations of holy people because this has been kind of the work that we were doing. Anyway, I remember going to the Ascent Center in Tzfat and speaking to a woman there saying, I want to go to this place where Shimon Bar Yochai was when he was exiled. Not many people know about this place, but she talked to somebody and that person knew. So the person came out with a map and told me it was a tiny village not so far from where he was buried called Picky Inn. And she showed me on the map how I could get there. And, thankfully, Google Map could do it too. So off we went to this cave in this tiny Druze village called Picky Inn. And it was just, I felt a little bit like Indiana Jones, I guess. It was just walking into this cave was extraordinary. And I was looking at a picture that I had taken at the cave when I got there. And I was just completely in this state of bliss. It was really quite wonderful. And I really felt like I had come home. Now, the question was, okay, I'm supposed to learn Torah. I'm supposed to live this life now. How do I do it? And again, cut a very long story short, I spoke with a rabbi in Jerusalem when we got to Jerusalem. And so I went to see him. I made an appointment to go see him because I wanted to find a school. I had these ideas of the ancient mystery schools where you could go and learn, the Kabbalistic mysteries and the Torah mysteries, the soul of the law kind of idea. And so I went to this rabbi in the old city and I said, I need you to help me find a school for women of my age, and I was in my late 50s at the time, for women my age where I can learn all about Torah and the deep mysteries of Torah and how to live a Torah and God-centered life. And he said to me, well, are you Jewish? And I said, yes. And then he asked me a question which stunned me, which completely shocked me. He said, what proof do you have that you're Jewish? I said, what? He said, well, what proof do you have that you're Jewish? I said, well, my grandmother told me. And he said, well, what other proof do you have? Because I have to tell you, whatever school I send you to is going to need proof that you are Jewish. What proof do you have? I said, well, my grandmother told me, and she died in the mid 80s, she had been dead for about 30 years by that time. And I don't know how can you prove it? See, at that point, I didn't really realize that my word wasn't good enough, that I needed documentary proof. I didn't even know where I would go for such a thing. And I said, well, how would I even find such a thing? He said, well, is your mother or your grandmother buried in a Jewish cemetery? I said, no, my grandmother converted to Catholicism before my mother was even born. And then he said, well, do you have her birth certificate or anything that ties her inexorably to a Jewish community, to a Jewish family, a recognizable bond with a Jewish family? And I didn't have anything like that. And I said, absolutely not. Well, what do I do? Because he's telling me that the only way I can really learn to live as a Jewish person and to learn Torah was to go find documentary proof of the Jewish identity of my grandmother. And I didn't have it. I didn't know what to do. And that's why I said, what do I do? And he said, well, you could go and look for proof. I tell you, I have a Lithuanian woman who has pretty much the same problem. She doesn't have any proof that she's Jewish, and it's really hard And the thing about it too is that whatever proof you come up with may not even be acceptable. And it has to be kind of incontrovertible proof. And I was, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And I asked him this, well, what shall I do? He said, well, you could go look for proof, or, and this is what I would advise you to do, you go through a formal process of Orthodox conversion to Judaism. And I promise you, you will learn more doing that than you will learn from any school I could send you to. Oh, wow. There is actually a process whereby I learn Torah and how to live an authentic Jewish God-centered life. It's like, oh, thank you. This is exactly what I wanted, you know. And he said, make sure it's an Orthodox conversion. I said, sure, of course. And I remember him sitting back and saying, well, I'm kind of surprised you're not challenging me at all. I thought you would be mad at me. I said, why would I be mad at you? I want to learn how to live as a Jew. I want to learn Torah, and you've just told me how to do it. I'm thrilled. I'm really grateful. And so he said, well, it is Friday today, so you have to go get ready for Shabbat. Now, so you cannot use your phone or your computer after the siren goes, because in Israel the siren goes, in Jerusalem anyway, the siren goes at candle lighting time, and that's when you light candles for Shabbat. And so he told me I had to light candles for Shabbat. I had to have a proper Shabbat meal. I had to get some grape juice or some wine. He told me everything I had to do. He said, oh, you could just come over to my place and have Shabbat with my family. I said, you know what? I didn't think I'm going to do that because I'm vegan and there probably won't be enough for me to eat, because most Jews certainly are not vegan. So I said, no, it's probably going to be easier for me to just do it myself. You just tell me what I have to do. As it turned out, I didn't have to cook anything. I just, went to a kosher restaurant and bought everything I needed for the weekend, pretty much. But he did give me very specific instructions as to what I was able to do on Shabbat and what I shouldn't do on Shabbat, what time I should turn my lights off, or keep the lights on through the night that we're going to stay on, etc., etc. He gave me some very simple instructions, and so off I went back to my apartment, my Airbnb, and I bought all the accoutrements that I needed. I bought the red wine. I bought it wasn't red wine, it was grape juice actually, because I don't drink. And I bought I couldn't find any challah that didn't have eggs in it, so so I bought pita bread instead. And then I went to a kosher restaurant and bought the rest of the food. I bought some candles and some matches, etc. And went home, looked at some of the papers that he'd given me about, what blessings to say, etc. Then I went online and I found someone on YouTube who was actually going through those blessings. And I wrote down everything they said. And I made sure I turned off my laptop and I turned off my phone, and I did everything I had to do. It was very stilted. It was very deliberate, but I did do it. I followed the rules. And much as I felt like I was in completely deep waters and had no idea what I was doing, there was something incredibly gratifying about just going through that process. And the next day, I took myself off to the Western Wall, to the Kotel, as I normally do, because I just love the energy there. And they have all the prayer books that you need. And I sat there and I prayed, and I came back and I had the rest of my food that I had bought the night before. And it was really quite a wonderfully kind of sublime meditative experience. I really, really, really loved it. And it was like, oh my gosh, I'm actually in it. I'm doing it now. And the funny thing about it was that outside of the practice, I knew nothing about it, absolutely nothing. So it really felt as though this secret door had just been opened. I could not wait to get back to the United States and get on with my conversion process. I could not wait. And so as soon as I got back, I flew back. I think it was during the night. The very next morning, I was online looking for the telephone number for my nearest Orthodox synagogue. And what I found was a Chabad house. And the words Chabad Lubavitch didn't mean anything to me at the time, but all I knew was it was an Orthodox synagogue. And I called up and I spoke to the rabbi and I asked if I could come and see him. And so I came to see him and told him, my story, and also told him that this rabbi in Israel had told me that this is what I should do. So here I was presenting myself for conversion. And he listened very carefully to my story. He asked me a few questions. And then he said, well, it's really quite interesting. He asked me a lot of questions. He asked me about Israel, what I felt about Israel. He asked me about Hebrew, whether I knew any Hebrew. And I actually did know a little bit of Hebrew because I had suddenly decided one day out of the blue that I should learn Hebrew. So I enlisted a friend of mine who wasn't even Jewish. I said, we have to learn Hebrew. And so I started learning Hebrew. So by that time, I kind of knew the alphabet and I kind of knew how things sounded, but that was pretty much the extent of my knowledge. Anyway, long story short, he told me that he didn't perform conversions, but that I needed to go to a rabbinical court, a Beit Din. And the one that seemed to be the best one for me was the Chicago Rabbinical Council, although Chicago was 3 hours away from me, but that did not matter. And so I called them up and I spoke with the administrator who asked me lots of questions on the phone. He was a really lovely man, asked me tons and tons of questions on the phone and, about my background, et cetera, et cetera. And so he could see that a conversion was needed, but also, the conversion was needed because I did not have the proof that I needed. But I don't think for one moment that he doubted my story. But without the proof, I really did have to go through the process. And so he said, yeah, well, of course, he welcomed me. He was so nice. And he said, okay, this is what you do. I'll send you an application form as soon as we get off the phone now. You fill in that form, you send it back to me, and we'll take it from there. And that's precisely what happened. I sent in the application form. He sent me a list of books. He sent me the entire conversion curriculum, which included a list of books, a very long list of books that I had to read. And he explained to me that I really had to study. And he also needed to speak with me and my sponsoring rabbi. I didn't have a sponsoring rabbi. I had only met one Orthodox rabbi. And so I called him up and, asked him if he would be my sponsoring rabbi because we needed to speak with the rabbinical council. And he said he would. At least he'll come on the call and see what is meant by a sponsoring rabbi and what he would have to do. And we had this conference call with the Chicago Rabbinical Council. And, my Chabad rabbi said, he would help me in any way he could. He would simply turn me over to his wife and his daughters-in-law, and they could teach me everything I needed to know. And that was pretty much what happened. These guys were so incredibly just so generous with their time and their resources. They had me over to their house every weekend for Shabbat, for the holidays. I would drive up on a Friday. I would stay till the end of Shabbat on Saturday night and drive back. One of the things that I was told by the Rabbinical Council was that in order for them to even consider going through with the process, I would have to move to be within walking distance of an Orthodox synagogue. And so, I waited until my lease ran out, and then I moved to to be within walking distance of an Orthodox synagogue. In the meantime, I was reading everything I could. I learned everything I could. I was having Shabbats and holidays with the Chabad family, and it was incredible. I was living the life. I had to change my wardrobe entirely. I had to start dressing in a completely different way. I loved it. I loved it. I loved what I was learning. I loved what I was experiencing. It was incredible, really. I don't really know the words. My life didn't change that drastically because, for nearly 3 decades before that, I had been living a God-centered life. But what really changed was, first of all, having to learn to pray in Hebrew. That was a trip. And discovering really that Judaism was more than just a religion. It was actually a way of life. And that the process of conversion wasn't just really about learning. It was about joining a people. It was like being adopted into a family, let me put it that way. And so it was like a two-way street. It wasn't enough that you wanted to join this family. The family also had to want you. And for me, it really felt like a welcoming back into the fold. I never really felt that I had gone anywhere or that I had left, but I also appreciated it was like taking a shower after a very, very, very long journey. And you suddenly come and take the shower and you wash off all the schmutz that you'd accumulated over years and years and years. The process itself, the mechanics of the conversion, this is coming to my second question now, are very, very straightforward. And in fact, if you go to the Rabbinical Council of America, they lay out very clearly what the process entails. Now, I don't know what the process is like if you're coming from no Jewish background whatsoever. You're coming from, I don't know what that's like. So there was no question of my being turned away 3 times or, being told to go and be a good whatever I was, because I came to the process as a Jew. The only problem was I couldn't prove that I was a Jew. And so the fact of my Jewishness was not in question. I just had to do what needed to be done to authenticate it. So I can only speak from that angle. I can't talk from how it would be if my mother or my grandmother were not Jewish. I don't know what that process is like. And I think there are a few videos here on YouTube where people talk about that. And I will go and try and get some links and put them in the description box. But that was my process. But I still had to go through it. I mean, I still had to have 3 interviews, and I still had to go, be dunked in the mikveh. I shouldn't say dunked, be immersed in the mikveh and all of that. I still had to do the lawful process, which had kind of a twofold thing. If I was Jewish to begin with, well, there was nothing lost. It's like all the schmutz I had accumulated are now being washed off. And if I wasn't Jewish, I had now become like immersed in Judaism. And part of that final process is a promise that you have to make to live an observant Jewish life. And we go through the fundamentals of Jewish faith, and you have to really look at everything a Jew believes, and you have to accept that into your own life. And if you're not willing to do that, then, bye-bye. I mean, that was never the case for me, because all I really wanted was a deepening of the Jewish experience, was a closer connection, day by day, moment by moment, connection with God. And that's what Judaism gives you more than any other spiritual system. Judaism is put together in such a way that 24/7 you are focused on God. We will go through in the channel the various ways that happens, but that's basically, the long and short of my story. I hope I've been of help. I hope I've answered the questions that I set out to answer. If you have any more questions, you want anything, please feel free to comment. As I think I mentioned in the introduction, the comments are moderated, so your comments may not appear the moment you write them, but they will be posted, and I will read them all, and I will answer where an answer is needed. In the meantime, have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful weekend. We're coming up to Shabbat again tomorrow night. So if you are Jewish, Shabbat Shalom. And if you're not, please have a great weekend anyway. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye for now, and God bless you. Lots of love to you. Bye.